Hey everyone, this is Stren from ExtremeRigs.net, and today we are looking at the CaseLabs SM8. This is a pretty new case, however it is an evolution of an existing design. So it's more of a modification to suit more modern tastes and modern needs. And it stems from the original single wide Magnum product line. Initially CaseLabs, a boutique case vendor out of LA, launched their first product, the Magnum kind of cube cases, and then shifted to single wide towers like this. And the first one was the STH10, which is similar to this, but it has another heat chamber on top, like this lower one, and you'll see more of that in a bit. Then they did this one, which is basically a cut down version called the SM810. And both of those cases had HBTX motherboard support, because at the time the SR2 was really the king of the motherboards. You know, for high-end rig, that was the gold standard, so to speak. And it was expected that, you know, with Socket 2011, that there would be a successor that would be just as good. That didn't pan out. So now almost every high-end build uses the Rampage 4 Extreme. And so that's the board we have inside here just to show you. So the SMA8 is basically the SMH10 that's been tweaked. And so instead of an HPTX motherboard tray, we have an EATX motherboard tray, which means no more 10 slots, but 8 slots. However, the outside frame of the case remains the same size. So the motherboard tray, now that it's smaller, shifts down a little. And that means extra clearance up top for radiators. It also means there's a ton of space inside, once we open this door, for stuff in here. You know, HPTX used to be a really wide motherboard. So let's quickly go over the features. Like any CaseLabs case, you can order this in many different color options. This is the black powder coat. You can also get it in white and a primer gray. So if you want to paint on top of it or powder coat, you know, get a custom powder coat from your local powder coat shop, you can order it in the primer. And there's also another gray right now that you can get. And you can mix and match panels. So you could say, oh, I want the outside panels to be white and the inside panels to be black, or vice versa, or, you know, pretty much any combo you can do. It just adds more processing time. The other features the SMA8 has, like I mentioned a little earlier, was the lower chamber. The lower chamber allows you to fit radiators down here. And you'll see later when we strip off the panels that there's a mid plate here that separates the motherboard chamber and the lower chamber. The lower chamber is also where you will mount the power supply or supplies. While the motherboard chamber also has possible radiator mounts up top and in the flex phase at the front. It is a big case. It's not the biggest CaseLabs do, but it's certainly up there as one of the larger offerings. For reference, this is almost exactly the same size as the Corsair 900D. The height's a little bit different, the depth is a little bit different. The main difference is actually the width of the case, and you'll see that as we go around. So if you look in front of the case here, you can see these 5¼ inch bays, which are not really 5¼ inch bays, they're called flex bays. And you can mount 5¼ inch devices in them, but you can mount other stuff. You'll see this is offset to the center, and there's a lot of clearance back here, some ventilation here. And you'll see later just how much space there is back there for cabling and for hard drives and other mysterious stuff that you might want to put there. So it is a big case with a lot of options. The other things to bear in mind, the other critical factors, I would say, well, you know, this is predominantly for water coolers. Other people, air coolers, aren't generally going to buy this case, although I know a few of them do. So the most important aspect is really how much cooling can you fit in. Unlike the 900D, which can fit a quad radiator, this can fit all quad radiators, which means 140mm as well as 120. So you can fit a 480 or a 560 in this lower chamber. Up top, sadly, you can only fit a 480. And that's a bit disappointing given that the case can fit a 560. In the front, in the flex bays that we talked about earlier, you can buy an adapter to put a 480 in the front. However, as you'll see later, there may be clearance issues depending on your setup. The other critical information, price. This starts at $560 or $570, and it goes up from there. Almost everything is a configurable option, and some of those options will add cost. For example, the side radiator mounts, you're almost certainly going to want either a 560 mount or a 480 mount, and those are going to add on, $30 bucks. You're almost certainly going to want a window, and you may want a small or standard, an extra large, or an XXL like this one. And the larger the window, the larger the price. So, just bear that in mind. So the other thing to say about the case is that it's built in kind of two sections. There's the outside frame, which consists of the good-looking panels, and the inner frame, which consists of the functional support panels. These outside panels are designed to be taken off quickly. So you can see they just clip on. There's some kind of springs here that latch onto nipples on the inside of these panels. And so all of these things, these doors, they can all quickly open up, and you'll see that there's a frame left behind. And all of these panels, including the frame, are built out of this really tough, strong aluminum. And that's nice because it means you can build, put your rig together inside the frame and have access to everything. You can get your hands in there. You don't have to assemble the whole thing and not get access. What am I trying to say? So you can assemble the whole thing, with just the frame. And so you get all that access, and you'll see, once I take all these panels off, just how much access you have. You see, we're doing this in about, 1 minute to take all these panels off? So before you know it, you basically have the entire case apart, and you can work on stuff. And you can see, this is actually the table wobbling. You can see the table here is wobbling. This isn't the case wobbling because the frame is weak. The frame is built like a tank. And that's nice. Some of these other larger boutique cases, once you take the panels off, things get a bit wobbly. This isn't the case with this. So what we're going to do is go ahead and fit some more components to this so you can kind of see how you may want to configure it. So we'll be back and you'll see a slightly updated case. Alright, so let's see what we've got going on in the case now that we've got the outside panels off. Firstly, you can see we have a motherboard in here. This is the Rampage 4 Extreme motherboard, which is a fairly typically large high-end motherboard. It's claims to be extended ATX. It's a kind of weird standard, but the point is this case is designed for this kind of motherboard, and you can see here without the back panel you can see the light through here, and you can see this lines up exactly with the motherboard tray, and then you have these big cable routing sections, so you can bring your 24 pin straight through there, and your graphics card, power supply, cables straight through here, as well as your SATAs. And then your USB headers, HD audio, whatever else you have can go straight to, well, you can't quite see them, but maybe if I rotate the case a little bit, you'll see, there, you can just see some light through there. There's one here, there's one there. So lots of cable routing options. Up top here we have a radiator mounted. This is the XSPC RX360. It's a fairly thick radiator. It's about 63 millimeters thick, I think. Not the fattest out there, but almost. And you can see, well, it's hard to see, but there is just clearance here. Don't worry about that. There's just clearance there to fit your 8 pins at the top there. It is tight. And you'll see that we only have one set of fans in here. So you are not going to be able to fit the largest, fattest radiator with push and pull fans inside the chassis. And so you can see we've actually mounted a couple of fans on top here. Now with the default top, which I'll get right now, you can see the default top, just right here, is smaller than that. You can't fit these under. If I put that on there, you're going to say, oh no, there's a gap. So CaseLabs sells extended tops, and there is a version that's 39 millimeters, so it just raises up a little higher, and that just gives you the clearance to put the fans underneath if you want to put fans underneath. Obviously these sides go down to cover the gap. There is a even larger one that's, I think, 120 millimeters, and that lets you mount your entire radiator and fans above, this plate. As can be seen, this is a 360 millimeter radiator, and as mentioned before, this case supports 480 at the top. So if we roll this over so you can see, I should really take that screw out that's making the noise. You see there's a blanking plate left in here, so you can put a 480 along the top. I didn't have one handy that wasn't a monster radiator. So that's why I haven't put a 480 in. You can see I haven't bothered to put this in fully, so that's why they're not quite lining up. So you can put a 480 in here, and you'll see there's also these blanking plates here, and one that I took out here, and that just gives you the option to, if you're running the radiator on the outside of the case, on the outside of the frame, I should say, you can put your tube straight through these holes, and that is super convenient. There's also these, you really can't see those, I'm worried I'm going to drop the case here, but there's one here, and there's one here, and they're just little plastic. I'll pull it out. Come on, nerd strength. There we go. Just a little circular cover plate out of plastic. So you can run your fan cables through there if you want, if you are mounting them externally. Obviously, if you're mounting everything inside the case, you don't need any of that. So that's the top. One last thing about the top. I do wish it had the drop-in mount. A lot of the CaseLabs cases kind of like the bottom. If I show you the bottom, here we go again. It's hard to see here, but you can just kind of make out a plate along here, and basically there is a removable plate in the bottom frame piece. So the bottom frame goes around the edge, and then there's a plate that sits in the bottom. And it would be nice to have the same setup on top. And the advantage of that is, you can set up your radiator on the plate, and then when you're all happy with it, you can just drop it in. With this, you have to always have the radiator mounted to the frame, and that's a pain sometimes, because that gives you less clearance to work in here, to kind of plug in the cables, to plug in your memory or whatever. Now, we do have a motherboard tray. That makes life a lot easier. So you can see this whole motherboard tray, Got to unscrew all the screws. So there's 4 screws on the back here, and they are spring retained, so you know you don't lose the screws, which is really nice. So you can see this thing just slides right out, which is a really nice feature. Pull the whole thing out, and you know you can see the features on there. Unlike the newer S8, which has you know SSD mounts and hard drive mounts underneath, there is nothing here. It just has this cover. Underneath the cover are cutouts so you can more easily get access to the CPU cooler, but there's nothing extra on here like the S8. And you can see the motherboard, you know, this size of motherboard just fits exactly in here, which is nice. Speaking of the motherboard tray, you can see we have 8 slots along here, so that means you can run your quad 2-slot graphics cards just fine. And you'll also see, if I get the light just right, you can see there's 3 40mm fan options here. That is an option. You can choose to get this with a hex mesh instead, which I think looks a bit better. Almost no one mounts 40mm fans here. I think I've only seen one guy who did that. And the other option of the hex mesh is you get the option to mount either a 120mm fan or a 140mm fan. And it's nice to have that flexibility going forwards. So I definitely recommend the hex mesh on the back of the motherboard tray. Last thing to point out on the motherboard tray are these thumb screws on the top of the PCI backplates. You can use a screwdriver, you can use your thumbs. Just nice little thoughts that make you feel that someone thought about the case. So as we slide that back in, let's take a look at the rest of the motherboard chamber. Like I said, we have the cable routing grommets here and down here into the lower chamber. And then you have this huge space here. You can see we've mounted a radiator up front. This is an optional flex bay radiator mount. I'll talk more about the flex bays in a bit. You can see there's just this huge area because this case is just so deep that, you know, if you're using a typical large high-end ATX motherboard, you're just going to have acres of space. So, you know, you could put a cylinder reservoir here, even a fat one. You could fit 2 of them there if you wanted. Even if you have something large in your flex space, like a long optical drive, or, you know, a rack of hard drives if you have some funky RAID setup. You still have room for a large cylinder res, and I would definitely recommend at least 1 cylinder reservoir. If you have space, maybe put 2 in for, you know, just to take up the space, make it look a little better. But otherwise you may be left with this huge hole, and if you get a large window, then that's going to look empty and it's going to look a bit weird. So just bear that in mind. It's one of the trade-offs of having a big case is what do you do with all the space? So, you know, that's the panel here. And what you might be able to see down here, it's hard because the case is black. So we have to keep on angling it so you can see. You can see there's a bit of a hole here. I wish you could see this better. You can kind of see the screws there. But basically down here there are 3 120mm fan holes. And again, that's an option. You can get this thing solid, you know, the bottom plate or the mid plate, I guess the mid plate, with a 360 mount here. Almost no one would mount a 360 here because, you know, a 360 would interfere with your bottom chamber. Really, it's there not so much for fans, although you could put fans here if you want to remove some heat from this lower chamber, and that might be useful if you have 2 radiators facing each other and blowing air at each other. You could mount some fans in here just to bring some of that heat out. But then bear in mind, you're bringing it into your motherboard chamber, which you may not want to do. Most commonly, these are used as easy ways to run cables and really because the cable routing is pretty good, mainly for tube. So if you have your graphics card, let's throw in a graphics card right here. And we have a R9 290 that I just have lying around, principally because the testing is not quite. We should probably screw this back in so it doesn't fall out like I did earlier. Alright, a bit more secure now. So you can see even a pretty large card like the 290 only runs to the end here. If you were to get a particular, well, we'll talk about that in a second. But you can see, you know, you have your water block, and then maybe you have some tube that comes down here, and it can drop right into this lower chamber, which might be useful depending on your tubing routing. Some people like to go to the side. It's an option. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the look with the 3 panels because I don't think you need all 3, but it's useful. While we're talking about graphics cards, even a long graphics card, this is the shroud from a 7990 with a broken pen, let's not worry about that. But you can see even a long card like the 7990 looks tiny in here. It's only coming up to, you know, halfway through this cable routing hole. You still got acres of space. I mean, you'd have to have just a huge card to really make the case look small. So, you know, that's pretty much the interior of the motherboard section here. As you can see at the bottom here, again, it's hard with black on black, but we have a 560mm radiator here, a quad 140, if you will. And it's mounted in there with no fans. When you mount a radiator here, typically you'd mount the 140mm fans on the outside of the radiator mount. And the radiator mount itself just screws in with 4 thumb screws here. Now, because it screws in from the inside, it means it's not the easiest thing in the world to mount. However, because it's one piece, unlike the 900D, which is a 2-piece radiator mount, it's still pretty easy. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. The side mats, however, are an extra. These do not come with the case. And I think they run about $30 or so. You know, using a 560 in this kind of case, I would say is really utilizing the case to it, you know, the maximum, because, you know, you can see just how much it basically takes up the entire bottom chamber. And why would you get a huge case like this if you're not going to use every inch of it? You know, there are smaller cases you can buy. If you just want a 480, you could save a lot of money and get the SMA8. And so that's why I'm somewhat puzzled as to why there's no 560 mount on the top. Maybe it runs into clearance issues, I'm not sure, but I would have loved to see a drop-in mount option with a 480 mount and a 560 mount up top. So if we flip this around, we can take a look. First off, let's take a look at the back. Should be fairly quick, because we've already done some of that. So again, as before, we talked about the options for the back plate of the motherboard tray, and then you have the 2 cutouts down here for power supplies. So you can run dual power supplies if you want. These days there are such large power supplies available fairly cheaply. You know, Corsair just launched their AX1500. There's the Leopard G1600. EVGA just launched their 1600 G2, and the P2 and the T2 are coming. So you don't need to have 2 power supplies these days, unless you're benching. You know, two CPU rigs are rare, so really these days we're seeing quad GPU and single processor, and generally a 1500, 1600 watt is just fine for that kind of rig, even when you're overclocking. However, some of you still prefer to do dual power supplies, dual 1000-watt supplies or something like that, and so you can do that with this, which is nice. Gives you options. Just remember, if you're running 2000 watts, you may need it on a different breaker. So on the back here, you'll see a few things. Up here, we have a hard drive mount. This takes two 3.5-inch hard drives, the old mechanical type. So you know, those drives you can pretty easily get in 4 terabytes now, so that could give you 8 terabytes of mechanical storage if you want. And bigger sizes are going to come out soon. Right here, you have the 2.5-inch drive storage. Here, you can fit 4 SSDs in this. It can get hard to wire up 4 SSDs because the power connectors get so close. So although you can put 4 SSDs in here, just bear that in mind. You may want to get SSD adapters and put them in the 3.5-inch too. But these days SSDs are pretty large. There's less and less people who are running, you know, 6 SSDs or 8 SSDs. And if you are, you may want to look at the hard drive cages to mount in the front of the case. This last cage here is a 3.5-inch drive bay mount. And that might be a bit of a puzzler. This basically is an option. The SM8 and the STH10, and of course the SMA8, which is this, you know, these cases are so deep. The CaseLabs doesn't offer a I/O option, and the I/O option would traditionally sit next to the power reset switches. So let's turn this around. You see the power and reset here, and typically for 25 or 35 bucks or something, you could buy an upgraded version which had, you know, 4 USB 3s and headphone and microphone outputs on the front. That's not an option on this case. So instead what CaseLabs have done, and it's not an option because the cables are too short to reach the motherboard. So basically they give you a second plate here which can be swapped out. You can see if I take this front panel off. This is just held in with 4 screws. So you get a second plate here, and then that has a cutout for a 3.5-inch bay drive unit. So you can buy an aftermarket one which will mount in this cage, and that will then give you your extra USBs or memory cards or audio connectors. It's a bit of a shame that that's not included. So my gripes with the case, you know, obviously we've talked a lot about the great things about the case, you know, the build quality, the customer service, the thick aluminum, the inner frame that stays strong even when you take the outside panels off, and you get so much access to the goodies inside so quickly. The thoughtful details like the hidden hard drive cages, the depth for the cable routing, the lower chamber which lets you hide stuff or mount radiators or, you know, have separate airflow so the heat doesn't get into your main chamber. You know, we have all these great ideas at work in this case. So what about the downsides? Well, firstly the price. Although I wouldn't really consider it a downside. I know a lot of people will say, oh my god, $700 for a case. This case starts at $560. But once you've added on, you know, maybe a bit for the extended top, maybe the, you know, the side mounts for the lower chamber, so you can mount radiators, maybe some flex bay accessories, maybe the extra large window that we have on the front here. Once you've added all those extras, you're probably in the high 600s. And then you may have to factor in tax, and you may have to factor in shipping. And so that, you know, you might end up paying over $800 for this case. And that is a non-trivial amount of money. You know, this is not some mass-produced steel case out of China for, you know, $80. However, in this day and age where, you know, Nvidia are launching graphics cards for, you know, $3,000, in that sense of things, it's not outrageous. And given what you're getting, it's actually fair, you know, a fair price. Aluminum is expensive, but it is lightweight. It's easily moddable. You can get any replacement panels. You can get, you know, you can order this in different combos of colors. So, yeah, I mean, yes, it's more expensive than a mainstream case, but you get a lot more. And compared to a build that would go in this, which, you know, it would be hard to do a good build in this case for less than $3,000 just for the components, because really you're buying this case if you're doing 3 or 4 graphics cards. If you're not, you probably want to get something different, something a bit smaller. So, you know, compared to that kind of budget, this much for a case that's going to last a lot longer than the components that go into it is pretty fair. You know, this case will outlast your build. You could use this case for your next 4, 5, maybe even 10 builds before it's out of date. So in that sense, it's not expensive compared to everything else. What are my other gripes? Well, you know, CaseLabs has a very functional look. We love the design work that's gone into making this so functional and so useful. In future, we'd love to see a similar amount of effort go into the aesthetic of the case. You know, there's a lot of cases out there that look cool, have presence. This one, it's very, it's not going to stand out generally. It's going to look very professional, so you can use it in the workplace. You know, if you're someone that builds computers for a living, you know, you could use this as a very good workstation case. But, you know, if you take it to a LAN party, unless you deck it out in a lot of bling inside, you know, it's not necessarily going to stand out, except for the fact that they're generally pretty damn big. And the last thing is, this case hasn't got all the ideas that went into the later designs. Although this is a new case, it's not really a new design. It's a modification of an old design. The SMH10 is probably a couple of years old now. And so the later design ideas that came with the Merlin and the Mercury series are not here. We don't have any hidden stuff on the motherboard tray. We don't have drop-in mounts on the top here so that you can choose what you want and easily remove it. And we don't have the reversibility from the Merlin series. With this case, you know, it may look like it's reversible because when you order it, you can order standard or reverse ATX. So, you know, this is the typical standard reverse. This is the standard version because the motherboard is on the right side of the case. However, you can't swap it unless you buy extra panels. You can't use the same panels and just flip it over. In Merlin, you can. And that's a really nice feature. Because, you know, maybe you move house, maybe you move apartment, and now you want it on the other side of your desk. And now the window's on the wrong side. Well, you can buy the extra pieces, but it would be nicer if you didn't have to. So, you know, because of those reasons, that's really why we want to give this a silver award. You know, it is a great case, and we don't mean it in any disrespect to say that it doesn't get a gold award. It's simply because we know CaseLabs has better ideas out there. And it feels a bit harsh to give it the silver. But we know that if CaseLabs were to start from scratch today, that they would do a better job with this, that they would have more features. Having said that, if you're looking for a single tower with a separate bottom chamber to mount radiators in. This is the absolute best case you can get for this kind of setup. The only other real threat to this case, I would say, is the CaseLabs SM8 with a pedestal, which gives you basically the same thing. It will end up a little taller and a little less deep, but it will basically do the same thing, and it will give you some of those extra features which you may want. So that would be one thing I'd consider. Otherwise, great case. We highly recommend it, and just don't think because it got a silver award that it's bad. In this day and age, a lot of sites give out award for everything. Oh, best contributor or best basically everyone gets a award, everyone gets a badge, and everyone smiles and is happy, and the marketing teams are happy. I don't like to do that. So it's not perfect, hence the silver. So that's it from the Extreme Rigs team, and we'll have more case reviews coming soon, and we will be comparing this directly to the 900D in the next video, just so you can kind of get a better feel of what you get for $700 versus the 300 something bucks of the 900D. And it's an interesting comparison because functionally they have very similar goals and they take up very similar amounts of space, but they are very different. So that's it from us. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff, and we'll see you next time.